Biology 271, so just the plant part. State the function of xylem and phloem. So, stop saying Plants make sugars in their leaves and they absorb water through their roots. So how does the water get from the roots to the leaves? Because leaves need water. And how does the sugar get from the leaves to the roots? Because the roots need sugar for photosynthesis, for respiration. And this happens through xylem and phloem. So xylem are these tubes that go from the roots to the leaves and all up through the middle of the plant. And they move water and anything dissolved in the water, specifically minerals, because the minerals are dissolved in the water, up. Okay? Little points to note: xylem are dead. They are not alive. It's kind of like fingernails. And they are made out of a substance called lignin. And lignin eventually becomes the wood inside of a tree. Okay? So, lignin, xylem vessels, they have no cytoplasm, no organelles, nothing. They're just hollow tubes. Which means that the water actually moves up, kind of through magic. Phloem, on the other hand, they move everything else that's not water or dissolved in the water. So sugars, amino acids, hormones, poisons, tracers, anything that you can get into the sugar or into the sap part, they move it up and down. This means that these guys are clearly alive because they do active transport. So what you'll notice on the sides of phloem are these little cells, and these are called companion cells. And they actually do a whole lot of the Mrs. Gren for the sieve plates. SI. The sieve plates that are all in the middle of the phloem tissue. Okay? So in the middle of the phloem tissue are a bunch of, a sieve or a sieve, like a colander or a drainer for your pasta. So in the middle, it's just like a plate with a bunch of holes in it. And this is alive, and because it's alive, it determines what goes in and out of these holes and in which direction. And the respiration and all the Mrs. Gren that needs to happen goes through the companion cell, and that helps it out. Okay, so there's a reason why this is there. State the function of xylem and phloem. So xylem move water and minerals up, phloem move sugars, amino acids, hormones, poisons, tracers up and down. Okay, identify the positions of xylem and phloem in that. I must have skipped it. So root hair cells, whenever we say root hair cells, we're talking about a plant, not your hair. Their function is to absorb water. Primary function, absorb water. Secondary function of roots is to anchor the plant. But root hair cells don't anchor, they absorb. They have this really long appendage, and what that does is, number one bio answer, increase surface area. Wow. Area. Okay, so the water moves into the root hair cell via a diffusion. Now, what root hair cells do, they purposely make their vacuole very concentrated. They purposely do this. So what they do is they pump all the water out of their vacuole, which means that there's a very low amount of water here and a high amount of water here. So what's going to happen? High to low, that's basic diffusion and osmosis. Boom! So they force the diffusion of water molecules in, which is technically osmosis. Alright? So there is a path that the water takes to get to the leaves. So it goes into the root hair cells, and then it goes across the cortex of the root, and then it goes through the this would be called a pith, but through the cambium cells and then into the xylem in the middle of the root. A little point to note, no one is actually sure how the water moves. We're just guessing. So basically, we go with what makes sense combined with what we know. We know the water moves from the soil to the leaves, which is the mesophyll. And we know it goes through the hair cell and through the cortex. And we know it goes up the xylem and then into the leaves. And then from the leaves it goes into the airspace and out of the stomata, back outside. So it kind of goes in this long silly circle, in to out. Okay? So you need to be able to identify xylem and phloem in, what is this saying? It says roots, stem, and leaves. So in a root, the xylem is in the middle. It's kind of the X in the center of the root. In the phloem, this is a bad picture. These bundles, these vascular bundles, should actually be split. And this little line in the middle, this is actually cambium, and cambium can become xylem or phloem. So the xylem are closer to the center. So if we were to split that circle, that's the, I got the wrong thing up. The xylem are all close to the center, and the phloem are on the outside. Alright? And in a root, so this is your root, and this is your shoot. So the, you know the difference between a shoot and a root, right? The stalk. And this is inside the leaf. Where are we to? The xylem is on the top, and the phloem is on the bottom. Okay? A quick experiment to show you how xylem work. If you take a celery stalk and put them in some food coloring and some water, you'll notice that the leaves start to turn that color in a couple of days. And then you can identify the xylem and the vascular bundles in the xylem in the middle. Okay? So let's just double check this. Suitable stain pathway. So food coloring works just fine. Why are root hair cells so good at the job for picking up water? Because they have that long appendage. We covered that. So transpiration. So we actually know what transpiration is. We just don't realize that we know it. So transpiration is when water is lost out of a plant through the leaves. Water being lost that way is clearly evaporation. That's what's going on. And the same rules for evaporation apply for transpiration. So there are some people that call this transpo evaporation, but just call it transpiration. So the water is a gas, and it goes out of the stomata when they're open. The same way the hot air goes out of your room if you open the door. Same idea. Okay? So here's a little animation of how transpiration takes place. So what we have is our spongy mesophyll has a lot of water molecules on the surface of all their cells. Alright, very wet. So what they do is they evaporate into the airspace. Now inside this airspace there is a high concentration of water molecules, as we can see there's 4, and outside there's a low, which means we're going to get the water vapor, or the gaseous water. It's going to diffuse out. I probably should have just waited. Yes. It will diffuse out. Basic diffusion. Okay? So let's think about a plant like a leaf, like a plastic cup. And the spongy mesophyll is effectively a sponge. So I have two scenarios here. The cup is the exact same size. The sponge is the same size. I put a hole in both cups. I put one outside in the sun where it's hot, and I put one in the freezer where it's cold. Which sponge dries out first? This one, of course. Oops. So this guy dries out first because the water molecules have more energy, so they move faster, so more of them make their way out. Now both cups are the same size, but I put more holes in this one than this one, and both of them are outside in the sun. Which sponge dries out faster? This one. Both cups have molecules that are moving really fast, but this one has more holes, so more will escape. It's common sense. Um, let's say I have a really big cup and a really small cup, and I put them both outside in the sun. Which sponge dries out the most? This one actually tricks people. I don't know why. The answer is it's this one dries out the most because there's more space for the water molecules to get away. It's kind of like if you had a wet t-shirt, where would it dry out faster? In your room or in a plastic bag? Yes, makes perfect sense now. Um, so the sponge drying is the same as transpiration in a plant. Whatever situations can make a sponge dry will make a plant dry as well. Okay? So it's all about the spongy mesophyll. Um, so the stomata are kind of like the plant's mouth opening up, open, closed. We talked about it's open when the water goes in, and it's closed when the water comes out. So the plant can control whether its stomata open or closed based on how much water it pumps into its guard cells. Now, how does water move up xylem? Because a tree is like huge. Xylem is dead. How does water get all the way up there? And the answer is through the properties of water called adhesion and cohesion. So cohesion is water's molecules' ability to stick to itself. Water molecules love themselves, so they will stick to each other. If you pull one, they will pull the next one. So if we look at this animation, as long as all the water molecules are touching, when I pull one from this area, it will pull on the ones next to it, and the ones next to it, and the ones next to it. So that's the cohesion. The next one is, oh, I skipped adhesion. Adhesion. I need a nice blank slate. The way adhesion works is like this. Water also has the ability to stick to other things. So the water molecule wants to stick to the sides of the xylem. But whenever it tries to stick to the side of the xylem, it pulls itself up, and this next one pulls itself to that side, and then over and over and over. A good example I can think of is when you were a kid and you kind of were able to walk down the hallway with your hands and feet on the wall. Same idea. Water molecules stick to both sides, and they're able to shimmy their way up without using any energy. And we call the combined effort of the adhesion and the cohesion, I feel like I skipped one, transpiration pull. Okay, so transpiration pull is a combination of adhesion and cohesion of water molecules. So these are here for a reason, but they're not done right, so I'm just going to skip them. What are some things that can increase transpiration? We're just going to look and try to see what we can see. Temperature will increase transpiration. We know that. Light intensity increases transpiration because with high light intensity comes high photosynthesis. And with high photosynthesis, the stomata need to open in order for that to happen. If the stomata is open, CO2 goes in, but guess what can go out? Water. Humidity and transpiration is actually backwards. The higher the humidity, the lower the transpiration, so that looks backwards. And wind speed. Wilting. This is a process that you do need to understand. When a plant cell cannot really burst because it has this cell wall on the outside, that strong cellulose. So you can keep pumping as much water into a plant cell as you want. All it will do is get hard like a tire. And when it gets hard, we call that turgid. But if you start to suck the water out of a plant cell, that's when something different happens. The cell membrane pulls away from the cell wall. So it's kind of like a tube tire. where you have the rubber on the outside and then you have the tube on the inside. If you deflate the tube, that can separate from the sides first. Another example is if you blew up a balloon inside of a box and then popped it. The balloon shrinks, but the box stays the same size. It's just a little softer. Okay? So when this happens, we call that plasmolysis. Plasmolysis. And plasmolysis is when the cell wall pulls away. And when it's hard, it's turgid. Now, there are 3 different adaptations to plants that we need to talk about. Ooh, I didn't talk about sources and sinks. Why not? Something's missing. Oh, there you go. It's next. Okay. So there are 3 different plant adaptations to environment. So if you have a plant that is in a very wet environment, it doesn't really need roots. So we're thinking about a pond plant. And we call pond plants hydrophytes. Now hydrophytes, they float, and they're able to float because their stems, leaves, and stalks have spaces filled with air. They have stomata on top and on bottom, just in case they flip over. And also it's really hard to absorb CO2 from the air when you're floating on top of water. They have a very thin cuticle because it doesn't really need to protect itself from water loss. And no roots, they just float about freely. So hydrophytes have adapted that way. Think, so here's your air chambers inside of the leaf, and the palisade is very thin because it's definitely on top. Think pond plants, so lily pads. I don't really know many pond plants, I'll be honest, other than lily pads. I feel kind of slow. Let's see what the book is saying. Aquatic plants. Stomata on the top, thin cuticle, very little lignin because it's supported by the water. They don't have a name. Your regular garden plants, they have no adaptations. So if it gets too wet, they die. If it gets too dry, they die. Because they don't really have any adaptations. And then desert plants are called xerophytes. So do we have mesophyte? Yes. So why wouldn't I have hydrophyte written? Because I'm slow. So mesophytes are your regular plants, middle. And then xerophytes, these are the plants that survive in very, very hot places. Okay? So hot and dry places. What you'll find is they have very, very, very deep roots to try and get to water that's very far underground. They have very shallow roots as well that go very far away to hold on to the rain once it happens. They tend to not have leaves. They tend to have spikes. And the spikes are actually mini leaves rolled up, to be honest. The stomata are also sunk into pits to prevent the water from actually escaping. Look at how far the water has to go in order to get out of this leaf. So by all the stomata being sunken inside of a pit, it doesn't really get a chance to diffuse away before it gets reabsorbed. You'll find that in xerophytes, the stems tend to be really swollen and full of water, so you cut a cactus open, you can't drink it. And there are no leaves, or very little leaves. Oh, the waxy cuticle, I forgot about that. The waxy cuticle in xerophytes is very, very thick. You'll find these plants are really shiny and hard to cut. They have a very thick waxy cuticle to stop water from leaving. They have less stomata, spines, spreaded roots, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and they have a tendency to only open up their stomata at night. Yes, you would have less photosynthesis, but that's how they survive. So translocation, this is what I was looking for. This is when plants move what they make from one place to another, and when they store it. So it's from regions, it's when plants move sugars and amino acids from regions of productions to regions of storage, or to where they can be used, one or the other. It's basically the plant's vascular system. Okay, so translocation takes place through the phloem, and we talked about the companion cell already. So your leaf makes some sugar, and it moves the sugar into the phloem through the companion cell, and the phloem would send the sugar to its sink. So your source is your leaf, and your sink is your 9 times out of 10 is a root. It could be anything, and it'll keep storing this sugar in the root. Think like a potato. It turns the sugar into starch, and the root gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Fruit can also be a sink. So before the root, if we had fruit, that could also be a sink. It'll start pumping sugar into the fruit. And the good news is, if the leaves were suddenly to die, the plant can use the fruit or the root and get that sugar to go back and be used for respiration again. All right. What you'll find is the phloem on the outside of the stem, and there was an experiment that was done called the ringing experiment, where they cut a line all the way around the bark, and it actually kills the tree because the roots do not get any sugar for photosynthesis. Now, we can use phloem to our advantage to either kill a plant or to kill the bugs that eat plants. So it's called systemic poison because it goes through the system. That's probably not the reason they call it that. I just made that up. So if we put the poison on the leaf, the phloem will send it to the root, and then it would kill the root. So we have to watch how we do this, though, because if it was to kill the root if it was to kill too fast, it'll actually kill the companion cell and never actually make it to the root. So what we do is we send a very slow-acting poison, we put it on the leaf, and that slow-acting poison makes its way to the root through active transport in the phloem, and it would kill the root. The other thing we do with that is we could have another slow-acting poison, and any insects that like to sit on here and eat, they will suck out the poison and die themselves. During seasons, I already explained this, instead of the leaves being a source, there are no leaves, so our source is our root, and we can use, but the plant can use whatever's stored in the root to help it survive through the winter. Okay, translocation, bang bang. Compare the rate of transpiration and translocation within plants at different seasons. So we kind of got into that. Just think about it. It's not that difficult. So pesticides and herbicides both work. So that's the poison through. So we can kill either whatever's eating the plant, or we could kill the plant itself with a pesticide or an herbicide. Okay, so that's